Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining Thurston Middle School's Community Forum this evening. I would like to start by thanking you for your attendance and for your partnership during this very difficult year. It has been a year of resilience, yet that it's very evident that together we can overcome insurmountable challenges. So on behalf of Thurston Middle School, I would like to thank you for supporting us. We could have not done this without you. In tonight's community forum, we would like to share our thoughts on where we are in the planning phases for the 21 to 22 school year. Over the last few months, the information we've received and the ongoing dialogue we've had week after week continues to evolve and grow and make the 21-22 school year a little more tangible for all of us. Like anything, it has been a 2 steps forward, 1 step back process. But it has been inspiring to say the least, now that we're slowly slipping out of some of those constraints from the pandemic. On Friday, we had our very first in-person staff meeting. It was the first time in over a year where we had everyone together, 40 passionate educators, wide eyes, pulses were high with excitement, and you could definitely feel some of these shackles coming off with a let's get back to business attitude. On that note, I would like to switch slides over and introduce a few of our elite Thurston and Laguna Beach community members that are joining us. First and foremost, Tess Smilowitz, 8th grade extraordinaire and ASB president. Our lovely and supportive PTA president, Lisa LaCourte. Thurston's very own Chris Nunziata, math teacher and department chair. The long-standing and well-respected Laura Silver, teacher in English Language Arts, and our exceptional science teacher, Bjorn Avila. Miss Amanda Vanderveen, our A through K counselor and woman of many hats. Our brilliant assistant principal and administrative support, Miss Megan Schooler. Behind the scenes, we have Shelley Spessard, our public information officer, who will be helping us with the slides and moderating the questions and answers. And my thought partners, Dr. Jason Alleman, principal of Laguna Beach High School, and Dr. Chad Mayberry, assistant superintendent of instruction. As we walk through today's discussion, we will be here to assist you with information and questions as it relates to their experience and area of expertise. All right, for the agenda slide. For tonight's agenda, we will be reiterating our commitments as a district, share the framework of our stakeholder engagement process and timeline, provide transparency on the interests and themes that have emerged thus far from our stakeholders, lightly touch upon our community partnerships, like Stanford University's Challenge Success and educational elements, share research based on the interests we've collected thus far, and provide a few examples of scheduling options and considerations. There will also be an opportunity to open up the conversation to the community for questions. We will do our very best to answer the questions we've received through the question and answer format in the box. But please know that any unanswered questions and frequently asked questions will be used to develop an FAQ document that we will share out with the community in the upcoming week. It is also important for you to know that we are in the midst of our stakeholder engagement process and we'll continue to hold meetings, some morning coffee chats, communications that will be sent out to provide transparency and updates of our thinking going into next year. Our goal is to have a decision prior to the end of this school year in order to avoid any last minute alerts or changes or moments before the new school year starts. And we also want to avoid any stress related to the unknown, especially as we're embarking out on our summer and truly want to embrace it and relax. I would also like to add that no concrete solutions have been determined, and we are still considering the pros and cons of returning to a traditional 6-period schedule or an adjustment to one of the 4x4 schedules, which have several iterations, such as a semester or a particular rotating block model. Each of these options will be shared with you tonight, along with research that identifies the pros and cons of each of those models. But before we embark on that journey, I wanted to share a few of the guiding principles on the next slide. It is important to set a precedent that we are committed to providing rigorous instruction for all of our students, ensuring that they are lifelong learners prepared for high school and post-secondary educational opportunities, and all of our children have access and opportunity to personalized instruction that promotes rigor and supports their needs to be their personal best. And this vision and mission is upheld by our core values and the responsibility of maintaining a clear focus on these goals, a commitment to the ongoing reflection of our work with an openness to change, addressing equity in our systems and practices and frameworks to ensure equal access and opportunities of growth, and to carry out our mission with courtesy by treating everyone with dignity and respect and seeking to understand each of our point of views, and finally with transparency by demonstrating ethics through open and honest dialogue and practices. Our community forum gives us an opportunity to share updates on where we are with the planning process of 21-22 school year, but also to provide clarification and hear from you about interests as we look to provide meaningful, rigorous, and supportive educational experiences for our students in the upcoming school year. For the stakeholder engagement, next slide. Over the last month and a half, Thurston has modeled our 21-22 planning process from a design thinking model that is comprised of 5 critical steps. The first is truly to empathize and gain an understanding of the community's needs by engaging each of our stakeholder groups. As I shared previously regarding our commitments, as educators, we are always in a state of doing and reflecting on our work in order to improve as an organization and also to strengthen our craft. So as we approach this last quarter of the school year, we began to ask ourselves, what have we learned from this last year? We knew that due to the pandemic, we developed a schedule out of necessity, and of course, the many challenges and shifts that came as a result. But on the flip side, we've also had some great spontaneous innovations that took place, especially when you're forced to think differently about every aspect and detail of your work. We began to ask ourselves, what do we want to avoid? What really worked? Are there other ways to incorporate these spontaneous innovations into our daily programming and structure? With this in mind, we started our engagement process and invited our community to reflect with us, to gather perspectives from all groups. And from this initial engagement, we began to define what those interests and benefits were, and organizing them into themes, which will be shared with you in the next few slides. From those interests and themes, we began to ideate and think outside the box and review different prototypes and models to see if there were some tangible solutions to address some of the interests that we were seeing. This included research reviews as we came across options or models that could help us address or enhance our schedule and programming and steer away from any of those constraints and challenges that we've encountered over this past year. And finally, testing by doing. We know that wherever we land, whether that's with a traditional schedule or some iteration of a 4x4 schedule, we will continue to make adjustments and tweaks to uphold our vision and mission and meet the needs of our community to the greatest extent possible. Next slide, please. So here's a quick glimpse of our process starting back in April, which shows our initial flare of engagement with staff, followed by a few student focus groups. We took the information we received, analyzed and consolidated some of the feedback into themes, and then re-engaged our stakeholder groups along this path that you see. We also met with educators and administrators across the United States in Stanford University's Challenge Success Virtual Symposium, who shared common interests and ideas to their approach. From there, we continue to consolidate additional information from stakeholders, which leads us to today's flare and sharing some of that information with all of you. Now, to share a little bit about our student interest, I will turn it over to our ASB president, Tess Smilowitz. Tess, are you there?
Hi. Hi, my name is Tess, and I am the TMS student body president, and I am in 8th grade. I've been in LWSD since kindergarten. Some good things to know about me. I am in the Spanish wheel, and after school, I do sports and spend time with friends. Tonight, I am presenting the feedback from Thurston students, and we got this through 3 focus groups and a thought exchange with all of our students. The focus groups were with our students in Directed Studies, which is the class for students with IEPs, from our English Language Academy, and from ASB. We also had the thought exchange that went to all of our students with 237 participants, 361 comments, and 7,395 ratings or stars on those comments. I'm sure you guys aren't very surprised that we're also opinionated. Interestingly, we found that half of the responses were from 7th grade and a quarter was from 6th and a quarter from 8th. One of the most important interests that we found was an interest to build stronger relationships with fellow students and teachers. Students want to build better relationships with their teachers and to have more one-on-one time with learning, and it also makes school a more positive environment. I've been very fortunate to have strong relationships with my teachers throughout middle school. This year, it was especially easy. For example, in my math class, my teacher was able to give me focused attention when I was struggling with a problem. Also, I created a very personal connection with my science teacher, much easier, where I was not afraid to ask any questions. Another common interest was that students wanted more flexibility with electives. For example, I have been taking the Spanish elective all 3 years, but because I did not take a 0 period this year, I did not have the option to do any of the other amazing electives that we offer here. Students also shared a desire to have support in the schedule so that they wouldn't have to do tutoring after school. A lot of students also shared that they liked that they had fewer classes so that they could manage their time better. In the focus groups, students also mentioned that they could have more focused attention from teachers, and they loved having only 2 finals at a time since they could study more thoroughly and they felt like they learned more and were less stressed. Speaking of stress, a lot of students responded that they would like to experience less stress in the school year. Although stress is good, too much at one time can be damaging, so we want to keep it at a healthy level. For me, I want to push myself to my full potential, but it is very important for me to keep stress healthy. For example, I want to have time to spend with my family, to practice sports, and to do the things I love outside of school. Finally, one last very important interest is that students want more engagement and voice in what happens at school. Students want to participate in more surveys or thought exchanges so that Thurston hears their voice and takes into account what they have said. And of course, we would all love to have longer breaks where we can spend time eating and with our friends, more food choices in the cafeteria, and more sporting equipment to enjoy on our breaks. In conclusion, as a student here at TMS and as ASB president, I'm very grateful that I got to be here tonight, and I'm looking forward to having our voices heard. We are excited that our perspectives are considered in the decision that the school makes. Thank you.
Wonderful job, Tess. Thank you so much for speaking on behalf of all of the students and for sharing your perspective too. Your voice is appreciated. And now for our parents, I would like to turn it over for our PTA president, Lisa LaCour.
Hi, Tess, that was awesome. And I'm feeling very lame because we had 152 participants in our thought exchange survey. So I'm glad our students are really engaging in these surveys. Anyway, great job, Tess. So in our parent survey, we did a thought exchange as well. And what really resonated is a need for ongoing mathematics, English language arts, and foreign language. So for the entire year. There's a need for engaging in-person full-day instruction. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, especially after this past 15 months. There is an interest for later start times to support sleeping patterns. I think that definitely needs some more research, but that was one of the top interests. There's an interest for fewer classes at a time, as well as an interest for the 6 period model. So there is a balance for both, or for many different types of models. There's not an overwhelming votes, at least with these 152 people that took the survey, on one or the other at this point. So The considerations are, there is a concern definitely about multiple transitions, and I saw in the Q&A something pop up about that. So that definitely showed up. No trimester model, which is not up for debate at this point. 5 full days of instruction per week. I think that everybody's pretty, in agreement with that. A desire for more information regarding scheduling options, which this is why we're here. This is why we've had past, Zoom meetings, and this is why we're going to have a lot of future, educational meetings, and the reduction of online screen time. So we're all in agreement on a lot of things. So it's good to know that we have this information that can shape what we're going to end up doing for 2021-22.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that honesty and transparency. For our staff interest, we have Bjorn Avila, Laura Silver, and Chris Nunziata.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So a thought exchange was also shared with staff. We had 40 participants, 51 thoughts, and 852 stars handed out. From this, there were some themes that emerged. What we found was that staff has an interest to continue rigorous teaching and learning opportunities for students, and to continue our rigorous accelerated math pathway. In addition to offering rigorous courses, staff values an ability for flexible intervention opportunities within the school day, and to expand enrichment opportunities for all students. And Bjorn, I believe.
Absolutely. Also through the thought exchange, the staff expressed an interest in more class choices and exploratory courses that could supplement core content classes. So just one example of this could be STEAM, that would of course nicely be paired with the integrated science and GSS core content class. Staff also expressed an interest in flexible scheduling, which allows students to take anywhere from 6 to 8 courses in a year, and has the opportunities for things like earlier release times if students have extracurricular activities like competitive sports or creative arts. In addition, building on the idea of flexibility, staff discussed ways to create space to regularly explore school-related topics by adding an advisory section, be used for things like ASB announcements and activities, no place for hate, and the exploration of social emotional learning topics. Laura Silver.
Thanks, Bjorn. Another interest our staff rated very highly was fostering the mental health and wellness of our students. So in the classroom, teachers and tests, thanks for talking about this, teachers and students forge bonds and make connections with each other, whether cooperative learning, whole class discussion. These connections create a supported classroom community, which allows everyone to be open to taking academic risks. So meeting the needs of the students in their mental state helps their academic state for sure. So smaller class sizes support this objective. Some of the benefits would be more and greater, I guess, targeted instruction, differentiation to help and support those students who need that extra boost, but also to give time to provide enrichment opportunities for those who are ready to go a little bit deeper or further in whatever our content is. Feedback, we would time to do individual conferencing, which is more relevant, timely, and most importantly, student-centered, where they play an active role in their assessment process and grading process on their own in their work. Students also have the opportunity to practice self-advocacy, and some of them still have to learn how to be their own self-advocate, and having that smaller size would definitely benefit that. And finally, that classroom community is strengthened, where students know that their voice does matter. So thank you.
Thank you, team. Definitely appreciate all that information and for you sharing it on behalf of the staff. Amanda, if you wouldn't mind hitting the next slide. Thank you. So throughout this year, we've also partnered with Challenge Success and Educational Elements, that are organizations that have similar goals in providing communities with research practices to promote student well-being, equity, and engagement with learning, some of the things that we've heard from some of our interests here today. And for Thurston, our Challenge Success work started last summer with a group of secondary school administrators, counselors, teachers, parents, students, and district administration. Our meetings throughout this year focused on past and current practice with concerns around student well-being. And of course, some of those concerns were definitely exacerbated by the pandemic. But thankfully, some of those barriers were removed, but our student-centered work is still relevant to our current and ongoing needs for this upcoming year as well. As well as the high school, they will be partnering for their third year going into next year. And next year for Thurston, it will be our second. As of my first year in the process, I've appreciated all of the diverse stakeholders, the opportunity to brainstorm potential solutions with leading educators like Stanford. And although I'm a Bruin, those Cardinals aren't all that bad after all. Next slide, please. Now we're going to get into a little bit of some of these options. And so I'd like to turn it over to Miss Megan Schooler, who will share a little bit about the 4x4 schedules and some of the pros and cons of traditional, etc. The floor is yours, Miss Schooler.
Thank you, Mr. Vidal, and thanks to our teachers and Lisa and Tess for joining us tonight, and good evening, parents. So we are going to look at some sample schedules for the possible 4x4. If we want to move to the next slide, thank you. And first of all, please do keep in mind that these are simply draft schedules. They're really in order to help us conceptualize what it could look like. So the arrival and dismissal times are based on previous year schedules. Time allocated for breaks and lunch can be adjusted based on stakeholder feedback. The goal in reviewing these is really just to paint a picture of what an average school day and school week could look like based upon the various scheduling models we are considering. So with that in mind, let's look at this 4x4 semester model. In this model, semesters would have 4 classes. Students would have 4 classes each day with the same 4 classes for one semester before rotating to 4 different courses for the second semester of the year. On this slide, you also see a sample course sequence for a 6th, 7th, 8th grade student, comparing and contrasting the traditional 6 period with the 4x4. In both models, you see that the student takes English, science, social studies, PE, math, and an elective. In the 4x4 model, you'll see that there is space for additional classes such as jazz band or a foreign language, as well as a year-long math pathway through a math acceleration and or through a math elective. Worth noting, as we are exploring the 4x4 semester model, we are simultaneously exploring content-based electives that would allow students to have year-long exposure to academic disciplines through interdisciplinary courses such as a STEAM elective with a specific emphasis on math content, or humanities electives that give students ongoing practice with reading, writing, and historical thinking skills. So, in this second version of the 4x4 semester, if we want to move to the, thank you, there is a rotating block for period 1 and 5. These 2 classes would occur in a year-long rotating block format, while the other 3 courses would be semester specific. So in this sample, you see a student would have PE and math, for example, every other day in that first course. And if you, in semester 1, you see that they have period 1 and period 5 on alternating days, and then periods 2, 3, and 4 every day. If you go to the next slide, you'll see in semester 2, they continue to have period 1 and 5 every other day, but now they have period 6, 7, and 8 for their other 3 courses. As we've been exploring these options, we have been reviewing research and soliciting the thoughts and opinions of our experienced faculty in order to understand the pros and cons of each, realizing that there is no perfect schedule. These pros and cons that I'm about to show are by no means an exhaustive list. However, it does capture some of the top benefits and challenges for each schedule. So the pros and cons for the 4x4. The benefits to students and teachers primarily are that it creates smaller class sizes and gives us longer instructional periods each day with a focus on just 4 classes at a time. The longer periods and the smaller class sizes create opportunities for more cooperative learning, as well as the opportunities for that rigorous, deep learning that Mr. Nunziato was referencing earlier. Further, enabling teachers to provide more feedback and in a more timely fashion also supports student learning at all levels, for students who are struggling and for students who are more advanced. We also found that this provides a unique opportunity for students to take more courses each year, which means students can explore multiple electives, such as foreign language and music. Students can also take content-specific electives, such as STEAM and Humanities that I just referenced. Students, and another added benefit that aligns to the interests that we discussed from the faculty was that students who do need to take support classes, such as English language development or directed studies, will be able to participate in our elective courses as well. And that would be new for us. The cons for the 4x4, from the research that we reviewed, there's no significant difference in academic performance between traditional and 4x4 schedules. With that being said, like anything, we have to allocate time and resources, or there are challenges in implementation and instructional practices. So we really would need to focus in on that to avoid those pitfalls. Going to the pros and cons for the traditional 6th period, one of the benefits that rose to the top was that it is familiar and that is appreciated, especially as we conclude a year that has felt so unpredictable. In addition, obviously having a 6-period day allows students to have exposure to all 6 classes all year, as well as having interactions with all teachers for the entire year. The cons for this schedule in many ways are the inverse of the pros from the 4x4. So namely, the schedule limits student exploratory and intervention options. Requires that those who want an additional elective must take a 0 period, which lengthens the school day. And it also does require teachers to have a larger caseload. And for some students, the con is that they are in all 6 classes every day, all year. So clearly there are many pros and cons. We could certainly add to both of the sides for both schedules. The process, just to be transparent, of identifying pros and cons is helpful partially now because it's helping us as we're in this decision-making process. Even more so though, we're going to be referencing this after we decide so that we can use these lists to help remind us of the benefits that drew us to one of these choices, as well as the pitfalls that we want to strategically plan around in order to minimize those negatives. Okay, a lot of talking from me. Mr. Vidal, back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Schooler. We knew that was a lot of information, so please know, as a friendly reminder, this seminar is being recorded and will be sent out with frequently asked questions to all families as well. In regards to the health and safety, we know that we will have to approach the fall with some sensitivity and precaution. Things are definitely trending in the right direction for all of us, but we have to remain stagnant a bit in the orange tier, and it's still the recommendation to maintain social distancing. That may change, but we are only as good as the information that we have. So please know we will continue to plan for COVID mitigation strategies until told otherwise. For the next slide. Following this community forum, we will be sending out an FAQ in the upcoming days and plan to hold a few touch points with our community to keep you all informed of the thinking being done around the 21-22 school year. The next step for us as a staff will be to review some of the information from our stakeholder groups, make recommendations to our team, and reviewing the pros and cons of each of the models and all of the information that we've received up to this point. To reiterate, we are still considering all options from a traditional 4x4 semester and 4x4 rotating block. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone was well aware of that. And we will still be collecting information from parents. So feel free to send us an email if you have any questions or concerns or considerations that you think we should incorporate as well. The next slide. The purpose of this slide is to share many of the research articles and resources that are out there related to school schedules. And as you can see below, there is a link that's there that's embedded that you can click on, and it'll open up tons of information for you to review. Many articles that are linked, as well as other resources, and as well the challenge success, educational elements, and a few other websites too as well in regards to the information. Okay. Questions, that was a ton of information. So at this time, we'd like to pause and ask if the wonderful Shelley Spessard has some frequently asked questions that our panelists might be able to address. Shelley, are you there?
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here, and thank you to the board members that are in attendance. Nice to see you here today. So we do have several questions, and so I will go ahead and begin with our questions here. Our first question that we received is, why is Thurston looking to change from the traditional schedule?
Thank you for sharing that. So we were looking at, as we mentioned, we went through that stakeholder engagement process and collected interests. And as we were exploring some of those interests from each of the stakeholder groups, it became very clear that there was some limitations to our previous traditional schedule. As an example, we talked a little bit about that with, for the highest performing students, just being allowed to choose one elective, band or music or foreign language or STEAM, without dramatically increasing the length of their school day. And then, equity issues around access and opportunity for some of our English language learners, having a language support class, but not really being able to explore another elective. For students with special needs, being in a directed strategies class, but also limited on the ability to explore different electives. Also, coming off of a pandemic and knowing that we will be having to address needs of our students in different ways, having flexible interventions around ELA and mathematics is going to be really important. And in the past, we've seen in the traditional schedule that those were limited opportunities that were either provided before school, during lunch, or after school. And in some cases, they were fixed amount of time based on the semester. And so if we have more classes that we're able to offer within a 4x4 schedule, we will have more flexibility in providing those extra scoops of support for kids in different periods of time, and then also pairing them with other potential exploratory options where they can come in fluidly and also exit fluidly. So this is one of the main reasons why we made that adjustment, and considering this whole idea of let's pause, reflect, and see what we possibly could do knowing the information that we have. Anything else to add, group? I can open it up too if there's anything else that the panelists would like to add to that comment or question. Okay.
It's a great segue to another question we had that came in. And they're asking if you could further address how this 4x4 schedule would affect IEP and 504 plans.
IEP and 504 plans. So it wouldn't dramatically change anything. So 504 plans, we would still be provided within the school day, just as any other student. As I mentioned before, there would also be opportunities for students to take additional exploratory classes or receive those interventions within the school day.
Okay, and the second part to that question, and you kind of hit on it a little bit earlier, was would this provide more opportunity for elective options?
So that one last part?
Yes, they're asking if this would provide more opportunities for elective options for students on 504s and IEPs. And I believe you hit on that a little bit earlier.
Yes, there would be, absolutely.
Okay, and we have a question here in regards to retention issues. And so if you could provide for us a little bit about summer learning loss and how that would affect our students with a 4x4 model.
Summer learning loss and how it would affect the students on the 4x4 model. So basically what we're going to have to do is, as Megan or Ms. Schooler was mentioning, and some of those cons, is to be very sensitive about when students were taking specific courses, and also to make sure that there is that continuity. So looking at potential students that may have taken a certain course in the beginning of the year, also making sure that we have that course placement laid out strategically in like semester 1 or semester 2. If we're looking at like rotating block options, the rotating block option is an option that goes all year long. So that continuity would already be there, as well as the traditional model, which nothing changes. In regards to the 4x4 semester model, we would also be very strategic about placing classes in that second semester that may continue that practice. So as Ms. Schooler mentioned a little bit about ELA 6 being a creative writing in semester 2, as Mr. Avila mentioned, the placement of integrated science, and then also following with a STEAM elective too. Panelists, is there anything that you'd like to add to that question?
All right, well, we have a science question here up next. Are students eligible, if we move to a 4x4 model, to take more than one science class in a year's time?
There will be options. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, do you want me to take that one?
Sure.
In case you need a glass of water.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we are looking at STEAM electives at the middle school because we have a 3-year sequence of science. And we would want to make sure they still take 1 year of the integrated science at each grade level. So the integrated science 6, 7, and 8 would be grade level specific. Electives built around science and math, or engineering, art, mathematics, all of the STEAM fields, would be the addition that they would have potentially the ability to, if their schedule allowed it, to add in. I think that might be a little different at the high school. So if it's somebody who's thinking about what the long-term trajectory, if the high school moves in this direction, that might look a little different.
Thank you so much. The next question is, based on our current COVID tier, would students be able to do a traditional 6-period school year?
So based on our current orange tier, whether students would be able to do a traditional, it would be very difficult based on the recommendations that we're seeing from the California Department of Public Ed. The recommendation is 3 feet. And I think especially now when they're just slowly starting to roll out vaccines, I know there was a proposal that was going to be that by September, they would start working with children under the age of 12. And so I know we're kind of monitoring the situation, but as of right now, considering the recommendations that we've seen and the practices that we have up to this point of the year, it would be difficult at the moment right now to do so.
Thank you so much. The next question is, are students required to take PE all year, whatever the schedule? For example, under the 4x4 schedule, will one of the periods always be PE, or can PE be dropped in favor of an academic class?
So go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't know if you were waiting. The way it would work right now, if it's a 4x4 semester, PE would be 1 semester. If it's 4x4, a rotating block, it would be year long and 1 course. We don't currently have plans for it to be required in the semester model to be year round. So they would still have the ability in that 7th or 8th course to select what they wanted to put there.
Thank you so much. The next question we have here is, are students eligible to take more than 1 English course in a single year?
Same as with the STEAM, we're exploring the idea of humanities electives so that we could have, and again, this really applies most if we end up going a 4x4 semester. So you might have a semester with English 7, and then in your semester where you don't have English, you could take a humanities course. And again, the idea being that we could fuse different areas that maybe sometimes are taught a little bit in isolation. So again, civics with an emphasis on reading and writing, or that kind of a humanities. It could be creative writing, it could be screenwriting, who knows, but we would be doing facing. So semester 1 is the grade level content, semester 2 is content-based elective.
Thank you so much. There's another question on here, requesting the objectives and reasoning for changing the schedule. If you could touch a little bit on that one.
I think I mentioned that a few questions ago, just about like why is now, right? And so, really wanting to, as we talked about a little bit about the research and some of the interests and some of those limitations around equity, as well as having students, and we've heard, Tess speak about the opportunities to explore additional electives. I think it's really important to listen to those interests. And as we mentioned, we're always reflecting and evolving on our craft. And so there's always an opportunity for us to reflect and improve. And if there's an opportunity for us to do that for this upcoming fall and to incorporate some of these spontaneous innovations, as I mentioned, coming off of the schedule of necessity that we had for the pandemic, then let's leverage those now. And if it's not, and if our, based on the options we explore, if we happen to land on a traditional schedule, for example, and there's not that shift, we're still going to have to address in some capacities some of those equity issues. And so it's not about just saying, okay, we're not going to change. Okay, well, if the idea is that we do go back traditional, there still are these equity issues. There's still these exploratory issues that we want to be able to address. And so if that's building that out over a longer runway, that's fine. But if we're not going to solve it this way, then how are we going to solve it?
Thank you. Next question. In a traditional schedule, typically what is the class size at Thurston?
In a traditional schedule, what is the typical class size? It could vary. I mean, as a new year coming in, it's very interesting to see that most of those have been cohorted models, but I think it can fluctuate anywhere from an average of 30 and in some cases up to about 34 from what I heard in union contract.
All right, thank you. How will TMS decide who gets their first, second, and third preference for electives?
We were brainstorming a few options on this, and I can't recall the priority list that we went through. Ms. Schooler, do you remember those numbers?
Yeah, and also my first name is Megan, everyone. So if Joe says that again, no secret now. But yeah, so we've already done course requests. And so what we would be starting off with is everybody's first request as put in would be first priority. Those who had requested a 0 period already would be getting, that would already go in as a second request. And then we would be using likely a Google form to throw out to all families. Here's what's here's what's available. And if there are new options that weren't previously available, such as STEAM and Humanities, those would be on the list and we would be collecting that information. And then spending some of the time over the summer playing kind of the LSAT logic game of how do we fit everything in and give as many people as possible first choices. It may not be everyone's first choice, but as many first preferences as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
No problem, Joe.
Thank you so much. Our next question. So we have several questions touching on this notion of why students were asked to complete the thought exchange prior to other stakeholders. Could you talk to us a little bit about that one?
Sure. I mean, I think, I think that I didn't realize what a big trigger that was for some of our parents out there. And so I did not mean to offend anybody out there in regards to that. But really, education, student voice is so important. And so, when we immediately talked with our staff members about this, initially with around the health and safety pieces. And then we started seeing some of these interests bubble up from staff members who went, wow, how real is this? And so we immediately turned over to some of our student focus groups to see, is there something from a student perspective that we might be missing or we need to incorporate or dive a little bit deeper on. So it was just really out of just pure discovery and interest, but there was no particular order or purpose behind that order other than the access that we had with our staff and our students in that moment. But do completely apologize for anybody that we may have offended by a particular order. But just wanted to say that, like Tess mentioned, student voice is very important throughout this stakeholder engagement process.
Thank you so much. There's another question. Why is there urgency to push this new model through in the next 2 weeks? If you could talk on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all would appreciate longer runways for discussions and stakeholder aspects. Again, we are just coming off of a pandemic and things are starting to lighten up just a little bit enough for us to kind of get back into the thinking of what things could look like for 21, 22. But we're trying to avoid as many potential transitions as possible. And I think that in order to help with more of a smooth process for all of our students and staff and multiple iterations over the years, that we just want to simplify as much as we possibly can. And if we have some practice in some of those skills, instructional pacing elements, et cetera, coming off of, like, as I mentioned, some of those innovations over the last year, why leverage it now? And it also becomes an issue of, equity, right? And the access and opportunity, knowing that we're going to have students that we need to address with flexible supports going into next year as well. So why not, is what I would ask.
Thank you. So if students do not choose an elective, STEAM or humanities, will they have less than 4 classes per semester?
That's certainly not a requirement because we do have other elective options. Now, I mean, if a student chose no electives, that could happen, but we don't allow for that honestly in the 6-period day either. So it might mean that they're taking a language, music, one of the wheel type of electives. Certainly, is it not pigeonholing everyone into humanities and STEAM only? Those were simply meant to be options that allow for some continuity of exposure to content areas that we've heard parents express just an interest in understanding how we can do that in a year-long format. But we want to have a variety, and we really do want, if we go in a direction like this, we want to be able to meet as many people's needs and interests as possible. And we know that not every student comes to school excited for English class. No offense, Miss Silver. I was an English teacher too before this. So, and I know that not every kid came to my class thankful that they got to, leave PE to come read books with me. So we want to create a schedule that really does allow for all students to shine.
Thank you. Has there been any consideration of rotating blocks in the schedule, either traditional or 4x4?
Yeah, absolutely. That's
And
one
there's
of the
just a
options.
little caveat. Sorry, let me read that so you have context. I
Okay.
know educational benefits were talked about with the waterfall schedule at LBHS and having classes at different times of day.
So I guess, I'm sorry, can you, Shelley, I'm trying to look at the Q&A and I'm not I don't know
No
where.
worries,
you are,
no
but
worries.
Is this question specifically asking about us exploring a waterfall within what we're doing, or the idea of a rotating block like AB?
They are specifically asking for a rotating block.
So
in
an AB.
Traditional or 4x4.
Oh. I guess I'm not sure what. I'll look for the question too. Go ahead, Joe, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I knew about the options that we had already covered, but then when she added context to it, I wasn't quite sure. So maybe it won't be.
So can I just answer it both ways, and I'll try to be succinct. We haven't really discussed the waterfall at this point, just because it's another layer of complexity, and we were already looking at the potential for either traditional or 4x4. If the question is addressing more of the AB rotation, some of the primary benefits that we feel we would be getting from the 4x4, which is teachers having a significantly lower caseload, which allows for really impactful feedback in a really timely fashion, that does have a tendency to dissipate, because teaching 6 periods, even though it's across 2 days, but again, using myself as an example, when I was an English teacher, if I'm teaching 6 periods and let's say my class sizes are 30, I'm now collecting 180 essays, which I need to give meaningful feedback to and then return ideally in a timely fashion. It's very different than collecting 90 essays and getting those back quickly with really solid feedback. So when we started this exploration with faculty, the idea of rotating block and increasing the overall student caseload and what that does to feedback and student-teacher connections is no longer a pro, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that. Our next question is, are there other local public middle schools using the 4x4 model?
Most of the research that I've seen on this have really been around the high school. We do know that there are other middle schools in the United States that have explored it. I think you'll find several of those covered in the research folder, I believe, on the slides, or I think a lot of them are in Virginia schools as well. But yeah, most of them that we've seen up to this point have been high school. And I know that there has been some references in regards to some of the other areas in California, but I haven't listed those actually on here in the resource document.
Thank you. We had another question on here that is asking if a longer runway has been considered in making a schedule change.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, we could go any which direction as far as options are concerned. If we do return to a traditional school schedule next year, we'll have another runway to build that conversation throughout next year.
Thank you so much. The next question is asking about passing periods. Can you talk a little about what passing periods would look like? This parent noticed that the time durations kind of changed from 15 minutes up to an hour and 10 minutes. Would you be able to give a little more context to those passing periods and what they look like in the 4x4 model?
I don't remember a passing period being an hour. Do you, Megan? I think those are 5-minute blocks of time between classes.
Yeah,
So,
if I mistyped, I apologize. But yeah, passing periods are set to be 5 minutes between classes to get from class to class. But the class periods are shifting to be longer because of the 4x4 sample. It would be shifting to be longer, with it being 70 minutes on days with PLC or advisory and 80 minutes on the days when we have no additional meetings or course commitments. But again, my apologies if that was mistyped. And Shelley, you're on mute. We almost made it.
Oh, I almost
without
made
that.
it.
I know.
I'm going to get another Christmas ornament. Right. So just wanted to give a time check. We have about 7 minutes. We do have to close this one to open up the next, but I will try to fit in a couple more questions really quick. So let's see here. Why is reducing class size an important factor with declining enrollment? If you could answer that one, please.
why is reducing class sizes so important with declining enrollment? I mean, just based on the numbers that we have, I mean, if we go back to a traditional schedule, as I mentioned, we have, you know, anywhere from, depending on the course and placement in a traditional schedule, up to students of 30 to 34. And that's not going to change. And with a 4x4 model with more courses operating at the same time, we can reduce those numbers to about 25. So, you know, the enrollment, declining enrollment is occurring, but it's not happening at an impact that would dramatically shift the numbers per classrooms in a traditional schedule.
Thank you. And there's a couple questions with a common theme, and that is, if one school makes the shift, how will that affect the other school? I believe they're addressing Thurston and the high school. Will it be both schools making the decision the same, or can one make a change and the other not?
I think there's a lot of value in uniformity and consistency of practices, especially as we're trying to prepare our students for the high school and beyond. And so I think that is definitely a sensitive piece to this process, and showing that we are having those consistent practices, as well as on the family end of it too, as well, and managing, you know, the different practices, routines, times, etc. So I would go one beyond that, and I would say that, you know, we're also trying to align some of our times too with the elementary, although they're not going through the changes at the secondary level like we are. We're also considering having alignment with that elementary if in fact we were going to make that shift. Dr. Alleman, if you want to add anything there too, feel free.
No, I agree with your sentiments around really being aligned on certain specific practices and focused around the experience of a secondary student, right? So any alignment that we could have in that arena, I think benefits students for certain.
All right, and we have a handful of questions around the notion of how will that final decision be made?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned in the tail end of the slide, kind of the last round of focus and flare. As I mentioned, our staff are looking at all of the different aspects of the stakeholder feedback from parents and students, and weighing in all of the pros and cons along with that research. We will have further discussions about that information. We will be meeting in department PLCs, as well as looking at our leadership team based on some of those recommendations. And then hopefully, as I mentioned, have some sort of consensus and decision on our direction near early June 1st, hopefully before school's out.
Okay, and how will the 4x4 schedule affect and/or impact English learners?
So the schedule for English language learners, they would still be getting their language support classes, but they would also, in addition to that, be able to get exploratory options or offerings that would allow them more like STEAM, mathematics, STEAM, mathematics, creative writing, and other elements that were traditionally limited in the traditional schedule.
Thank you. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to you, Principal Vidal, to share any closing thoughts before we hop on to our next meeting.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, thank you for coming to tonight and sharing your questions. We know that there was a little bit of fear and anxiety around this and some trauma that we all experienced coming off of the pandemic. And I just want to say that I do thank you for assuming good intentions, for sharing your feedback, for your willingness to be supportive and continue to ask questions and share your ideas about how we can best support kids together. So all in all, I just want to say thank you all for coming tonight. We look forward to the ongoing connections with you around this topic and supporting our kids going into the next school year. And thank you, panelists, for being here this evening and supporting us. We appreciate your support and have a great evening.